Hey AP Econ, this is going to be a quick video just to get through a little bit of the behind the scenes bank monetary policy, interest rate bonds, just some of the things kind of going on behind the scenes in hopes that you better understand the tools that the Federal Reserve has and kind of how and why they work. At the end of the day, guys, a major thing that I do want us taking away from this that probably if we're held accountable for anything, it would be this kind of fundamental relationship right here. Think of the seesaw. The idea that bond prices and interest rates are pretty much always going to have an opposite seesaw effect. And that's something that the Federal Reserve uses with their buying and selling of bonds, open market operations, in order to help keep the interest rate where they want it or help keep it low if they're trying to have stuff expansionary. Okay, and sometimes understanding behind the scenes what's going on, like I said, it'll just help us understand monetary policy as well as money creation and kind of the reserve requirement and everything. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is try to kind of just talk behind the scenes of what is happening when money is deposited at a bank and loaned out, and then get across the concept of bonds and how bonds kind of serve as competition for the bank, competition to making a loan. Okay, and that's why it has such a relationship with interest rates. All right, so having said that, what we're looking at here, let's see if this is going to work. What we're looking at here is going to be a goodness gracious, kind of like an accounting statement behind the scenes of a bank where they keep their liabilities and their assets. And obviously it kind of always has to balance out. Any of you that have taken accounting kind of understand that. So I'm going to kind of go through a deposit, go through a loan, yada, 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 and kind of talk through what it means. Okay, so to start out, the first example that we're going to do is going to pretend that somebody goes to the bank and deposits money. Okay, and I told you in my last PowerPoint that that what banks do is they basically take money as a deposit and they loan it out, and that's their hustle. Okay, when you take money, let's say it's $1,000. When you take money and you give it to the bank, think about it. You just gave them money, and for the bank, that's now a liability because they now owe you $1,000. Okay, legally, you can come up pretty much at any time that they're open and say, hey, I want my $1,000 back. Okay, so from the point of view of the bank, when you deposit money, that is now a liability. Now, of course, you've given them money, so they have $1,000. And right now, I'm going to call that $1,000 just reserves. Okay, all right. So you deposited $1,000. They have that $1,000 as reserves. Now, let's take into it the concept of a reserve requirement. Okay, we can break down these reserves. So now instead of $1,000 reserves, let's say that they have $800 excess reserves, and they have $200 required reserves. Okay, now you should be able to look at something like this and answer, well, what is the reserve ratio? If $1,000 was deposited and the bank has $800 in excess reserves and $200 in required reserves, hopefully we can figure out that that means that the reserve ratio was 20%. Okay, if the reserve ratio was 50%, they would have less money to loan out. If the reserve ratio was 10%, they would have more money to loan out. Okay, and that kind of gets across how the reserve ratio affects the money supply. Okay, now the next thing to understand is that in large mass, this bank now has that $800 in excess reserves. Now comes the question, well, what are they going to do with it? And I told you the way that a bank makes money. A bank makes money by loaning money and earning interest off of that. Also remember that a bond is essentially a government loan. Okay, so thinking about it from this point of view, this bank now has $800. They could loan it to you or I or a company if we want to buy a house or a car, or a company wants to expand, or they could hold government bonds. Okay, they could hold government bonds. Now, here's the thing. If they take this $800, and you know, in real life, we're probably talking about millions. If they take this $800 and they buy bonds, can we see that? Yeah, we can. And they buy bonds. Okay. If they choose to buy bonds, then that's $800 they can't loan out. And the less money that there is to loan out in theoretical loanable funds, hopefully we understand that that naturally is going to make interest rates higher. Okay? So when the Federal Reserve sells bonds, maybe, you know, looking back at our seesaw, maybe they give a